Welcome to The Real Thomas Jefferson, episode 34. And today we have the second part of our interview with Jeffersonian scholar, Dr. Garrett Ward Sheldon. Yay.
And Garrett, how did you get on the bottom this time? You were up in the upper left last time or something?
Yeah, I thought I was still on the upper. I see.
No, I'm just saying your picture's on the bottom of all three of ours.
Oh, we look like the Brady Bunch. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh,
here's
God.
a story.
Don't go there.
Of three very lovely historians. All of them had hair.
Hey, I just lost Garrett. What's going on? We don't have your picture. We don't have your video, Garrett. Why don't you read the intro?
Okay, I'm going to read the intro while he gets his camera fixed. Okay, this week we have part two of the two-part interview with Professor Garrett Ward Sheldon of University of Virginia. Wise Emeritus. Woohoo! Professor Sheldon, a sort of Renaissance man, has published much during his career, but we again focus on his well-received book, The Political Philosophy of Thomas Jefferson, and it was published in 1991. The focus of this week is the role of morality and education in his political philosophy. But first, the aim of this show, The Real Thomas Jefferson, is to get real about Thomas Jefferson, to revisit and revise the revisionists ever in the business of deconstructing Jefferson's prose, his letters, addresses, memos, etc. Jefferson think today's historical progressivists cannot be taken at his word because, in the words of one scholar, he was a baffling series of contradictions. Humbug. Wait, it's not December. Okay. Jefferson can be known, and logic, not intuitive and discretionary deconstruction, is the method. I am Donna Vitek, and this is the real Thomas Jefferson, episode 34. So now let's get real with Professor Sheldon. Yay! Your camera's fixed. Okay, the first question.
And you're centered pretty nicely with the camera. Don't fidget anymore. I like the.
Okay, I'll try.
Even though you don't have my beautiful sunflowers in the background, but that's okay. All right, Donna, take us home.
Dun, 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 dun. On page 55, you discuss Thomas Jefferson's moral sense. You claim it consists of moral choice, which compromises knowing good and evil and freedom to act on that knowledge. Ooh, 2, an innate feeling of sympathy for other humans, and 3, a natural sense of justice being the result of 1 and 2. Can you explain in layman's terms what it means to be a moral agent? Like maybe 7th or 8th grader terms for my students.
You know, yes. I always speak to 7th and 8th graders when I talk, you know that.
Jefferson believed that, as we said last time, to have a democracy, you have to have a citizen that is educated, participates in rule, is economically independent, and is moral. And by moral, he meant what he often said, Christian ethics, or he called it the ethics of Jesus. The ethics taught in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 4-6, love, forgiveness, forbearance, peace. And I think along with John Adams, Jefferson said, you have to have a moral culture to have a democracy. All that freedom has to be directed in a good way, a moral way.
It has to be grounded, I think you want to say, right?
But he believed that he didn't like all the denominational squabbles over petty doctrine or what we call polity in the church structure. He said, if you found what all churches agree on, it's Christian ethics. And so freedom of religion was partly to discuss all perspectives, and we'll get on this when we talk about education, discuss all perspectives in Christianity and what will be common to them all Jefferson thought was Christian ethics. And that will develop this moral sense, which we have innately. We have knowledge of good, but we need teachings from the Bible of what is good conduct, the 10 Commandments, to not steal, kill, lie, commit adultery, all that. But also Jesus added the new commandment to love others, to love God and his commandments, his law, and to love others as yourself, and the story of the Good Samaritan. So Christian ethics, morality, very central to Jefferson's view of American democracy.
Wow.
I have added, I think it's grounded, Jefferson's views are grounded in morality. I don't know if you agree with that, but I think because when he talks about liberty and concepts like that, he wasn't someone who believed that liberty was autotelic. It's an end in itself. If you read him carefully, I think he argues that liberty is for the sake of human thriving, human happiness, eudaimonia in Greek, in modern pronunciation. The only thing I would say when we talk about the moral sense and how it operates, it's not cognitive in any sense. It's through feeling. It's not anything. It's not a matter of knowing the good. If you want to use the word knowing, I'd say knowing in quotes. It's a matter of feeling, sensing, because it's a sensory factor. I sense what is good, and I have a natural sense for it, just like I have a natural sense for hearing and seeing. I, in a sense, know what's good at birth, in the same way as I know how to see at birth. The problem is reason at times corrupts my moral faculty through peer pressure or reasons that might serve my own interests and things like that. So in effect, when I make a moral decision, I feel the right thing to do. Sometimes, as I said, the right thing to do is not the right thing to do, like freeing slaves at the inopportune time, because it might cause more, there might be a repercussion, cause more damage than good in the long term. But it's a sensory faculty, not a cognitive faculty so much.
Right. We know kind of intuitively by sensing what is right.
So my question is, not really a question. Well, I guess it is. If we take into consideration your answer and we look at our society today, there's a lot of that missing. And I think it's causing the destruction of our society.
Yes, he lived at a time, an earlier time, when Christianity, which was much more dominant in the culture than it is today. And I mean, you know, we're all sinful and fallen short of the glory of God, as St. Paul said. But there was a general Christian morality until about the 1960s, the new morality, which is the old sin. And by that, I mean that Jefferson lived when people went to church. You could assume marriage, family, honest work, only semi-corrupt government. And we now know that that has changed. So he would be concerned about that, as well as the other weaknesses in politics in America.
Wow.
I would add quickly, before I go to the second question, that even among the deists, of which Jefferson was one, you often found a sort of secularized Christian morality among those people. Most deists were not amoralists, thinking
right.
that.
And they came, I mean, realize this, they just came out of the First Great Awakening, which was a great Christian revival in America.
Yeah.
And they're entering the Second Great Awakening. And these ethics were understood by the grace of God as what really made society healthy and made the individual happy. It's not always easy to be moral, to do the right thing, to be faithful, honest. But King Solomon, the wisest king of Israel, King Solomon said, in the long run, you're happier if you follow the will of God and Christian ethics.
And
Wow.
The ancient virtue ethics theorists would say something similar. in that, our relations with others. Jefferson says the same thing. Our relationships with others form the foundation of our moral sensing. In other words, you can't have a moral person in isolation from.
Exactly. And I mentioned, I recently reread my book after 33 years. And the section on ethics and democracy, he contrasts some ancient philosophers, as you know, some ancient moral teachings, like Stoicism and so on, that focused on the individual. And he said they focus on the individual, individual peace, individual contentment. But Christian ethics focuses on social morality, relationships, love, forgiveness, kindness. And he taught that over and over in these letters to his grandson about being moral, being considerate of others, being polite, and how that was the, sort of the oil of society that smooths over the rough spots that most of us grew up with in the 1950s. To never say a mean thing, to never be rude. America has changed.
Oh yes, not for the better. Yeah. Okay, so our next question, following on the first question, you argue that Thomas Jefferson, unlike Hobbes, did not have a contractarian notion of justice. What is a contractarian notion of justice, and how did Jefferson's sense of justice differ?
Mark, I'll give you that one. No, in terms of Hobbes,
I don't even know how to pronounce contractarian, so just you can
contractarian. Remember Hobbes' Leviathan was, the state of nature is like a jungle, a violent society, and the only thing that gives peace is they make a contract with the most brutal king of all to force peace. And so that kind of social contract in Hobbes, Jefferson rejected. Now Locke's social contract is different. As I often told my class, Locke is the key to American political theory.
I like that.
I get it.
Did you get that?
I still don't get it. It's
But anyway, if you look at Locke's second treatise, which I taught in my history of political theory class, he describes the state of nature as relatively peaceful. Only a few people are criminal and violate others' rights by stealing or killing. But those few people, he said, have to be controlled, and we can't do it if we're the victim. So you have a state that's basically a police judicial function for dealing with people who are criminals. But most people, even Locke said, respect others' rights, because you say, I won't steal because I wouldn't want someone to steal from me. And that's sort of like the moral sense. You say, well, I won't kill because I don't want to be killed.
This is a rationally binding thing. This contractarianism is rational, where moral sense is not rational. And this sort of contractarian notion of justice goes all the way back to the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who gives you a similar definition of justice. And I like what you said on Locke, and that's a very powerful theory, that notion of a contract. I'm not going to do you harm because I don't want you to do harm to us. It's very consequentialist. It's very utilitarian, focusing on consequences, not whether something is intrinsically right or wrong. Jefferson's view, and Garrett, if you want to add to this, is just simply, I know what's right. I can feel it, right? And if things don't get in the way, I won't necessarily act on it. I might have to be encouraged. Ethical education is encouragement, right? Not teaching you what's right or wrong because I know it, but I need to be encouraged to act in beneficial and in morally beneficial ways, and discouraged from acting in morally ill ways.
Right, and you get that from your mother.
Beat it, India. Yeah, and
wait, he needs a few more beatings, this Dr.
Holacek. I would add, let me add something that I think maybe a little off in your book, and you can tell me if you, a lot of people miss this when Jefferson talks about educating people who are born with a moral sense. And he says somehow, certain people, very few are deficient in moral sense. And Jefferson talks about how that can be remedied through education. You've got your tea. You're drinking it in a very British way. You need your pinky up in the air yet. There you go. Anyways, but what so many people say, and I'm not sure you do, but a lot of people think that Jefferson is talking about teaching you how to behave morally in a way that makes up for that. What I want to add, this is not compensating for want of moral sense. What this is doing is conditioning a person per se. I'll never know what it's like to feel what's right or wrong, but someone could be conditioning through reward and punishment, for example, to behave in the right way. But that doesn't make a person moral. If I'm born without a moral sense or a defective moral sense, just like if I'm born blind, I'm just never going to be a moral person, right? It's just not going to happen. I can act and behave morally and be persuaded not to behave viciously, but that won't make me moral. That'll be a sort of conditioning for the people who are born without or with a defective moral sense, myself included.
Where's the pinky? Well, I was thinking about that because I think we may, I don't know the statistics, but people born without a conscience don't naturally have that moral sense. Sociopaths don't have that moral sense.
Yeah, and Locke calls it the law of nature, that we know morals by nature, and you could say the moral sense, that it is wrong to kill, steal, rob, and lie, and so on, because we wouldn't want it done to ourselves. So if everyone's like that, you wouldn't need a state. But he says some people don't know natural law, don't have the natural law, what you might call conscience or moral sense.
Right.
He doesn't say why. He just says there obviously are people that have no conscience about stealing or killing. And so you have to have the state to correct those and punish those who violate others' rights. And that's where you get into due process of law, going all the way back to Magna Carta, and a limited state to doing that judicial function. But one of the reasons you have to have a state, because although John Locke said you know the natural law and you respect others' rights, he also says you can't be a judge in your own case because you can't be impartial.
Right.
And that there's that element of Calvinist sin in Locke, that we are sinful, self-interested, prideful. When it affects us, you can't be a judge in your own case. So the state is set up to be an impartial judge in cases of violation of rights or immorality.
That's Adam Smith as well, is it not?
Yes.
So the first classroom rule in our classroom is treat others as you want to be treated.
There you go.
Well, yeah. I'm a sadist.
And so, if a student says, well, I like being beaten up, so I want to beat up other people, that's where you get into, she said, psychopaths. Then you got to call in Freud.
And then you're in trouble.
Call in
That's another show. That's a spin-off.
Well, I don't know if you know this, Garrett, but I have 5 books on Freud.
Really?
I was a very serious Freudian scholar till I just got tired of Freud.
Well,
I did some heavy duty stuff on Freud, philosophical stuff, getting at the sort of metaphysical aspects of his theory, the philosophical aspects of how we thought, what he thought. And anyways, that's another story. All right, let's go down to the next one, Don.
The question I've been waiting for. Okay, last for moral sensing. Oh boy, you mentioned the moral sense is an olio, a melange, a pastiche, a salmagundi. Salmagundi. Hey, okay, this is.
I love those words, Donna. Boy, you've never
Dr.
been
Holochek's writing
now.
So I'm just going to word it in my simplistic way. What effect did the Christian Bible have on Thomas Jefferson's political philosophy?
Well, he, like all other Virginia gentry, grew up in the church, which then was the Church of England, the Anglican Church. which reads scripture and during every service. And he had tutors that were Christian ministers, priests. So he grew up with the Bible, as almost everyone else did in colonial America, certainly the Puritans. And he distilled what, he thought was most important, which was the ethics of Jesus. He called it the ethics of Jesus, which are the greatest ethics in history, and the ones that promoted the most good and the most happiness, decency, and the most justice in society. So he thought they could be best taught, like everything else, academic freedom, economic freedom, with religious freedom. That the discussion of all the different Christian and non-Christian theologies would boil down to the ethics of Jesus: love, forgiveness, forbearance, reverence to God.
Well, that would have to be but that wouldn't include the non-Christian, because the ethics of Jesus is insignificant to, let's say, the Jewish religion.
No.
Well, actually, no. We better not go down that road today. That'd be another good discussion, because one of my fields is political theology.
But all Jefferson is really saying is that, right or wrongly, he's saying is that all real religious systems, if they're genuine religious systems, if they're genuinely moral systems, have our duties to God and our duties to others. He says that all the time. Duties to God, the duties to others. The duties to others, right, are really the teachings of Jesus, simplified. And why I struggle with someone who taught ancient ethics, and I prefer Aristotle to Jesus, for not to offend anybody, but I just find the system a little more intriguing, maybe because but why Jefferson loved the teachings of Jesus, I think, is because the principles were so easy a child could understand them, number one. And that meant that Jesus could be the exemplar, I guess, for Jeffersonian Republicanism. He could hold up someone to say, if you want to know what it means to be the ideal system of a Jeffersonian Republic, here's Jesus.
Right.
I
don't know if you like that, Garrett. What do you think? I really do believe he held Jesus.
This reminds me of I was raised by a dear Christian mother, and I remember I recently, as you know, Mark, wrote my memoir, wrote my autobiography, which I'll be glad to send you, Donna.
Yes, I love it.
And I recall my mother tucking me into bed when I was perhaps 5 years old. She was a dear, sweet Christian lady. And she said, "Okay, Gary." She called me Gary. She said, "Now let's say our prayers." So as the selfish little brute that I was, I prayed for more toys for me, more candy for me, that God would side with all my battles. And my mother, instead of saying, "You selfish little sinner," said, "That's nice, Gary," showing mercy to me. She said, "That's nice, Gary. Now let's pray for all the children who have no toys, no candy, don't know God, and for peace in the world. World peace." And I would pray for that. So you see, she took the Christian approach of correcting a nasty little boy.
Well, it's not a nasty boy. It's just we are, as youngsters, we are
a normal boy.
We are intriguingly selfish individuals.
Except it happens at older ages now. You know, not then. It was when you were what, 5? Now it's
5. Yes,
60-something years old.
Mm-hmm.
It went right over Dr. Holacek's head.
Anyway, I'll to add to that, I don't want to reduce everything to the teachings of Jesus. That was, in my estimation, the most important element to his moral sense thinking, but he was certainly massively influenced by virtuosic thinkers. Not so much Aristotle. He says not Plato. I have a hard time believing that, but the Stoics and Cicero. Cicero was an eclectic philosopher who was by preference a Stoic.
Yes.
By that I mean he didn't profess any allegiance to any particular group of philosophers, but when it came time to talk about ethics, he always seemed to be talking about the Stoics. So you have that, and as Garrett mentions in his book, we have the moral sense and moral sentimental philosophers of his day, Adam Smith, Lord Kames, and numerous, Lord Bolingbroke, and numerous other people at the time. All three of those really sort of coalesced. And I'll add that Jefferson always thought you can get moral instruction, which meant encouragement or discouragement, reading poetry, reading sermonizers. He read the French Reverends Massillon Bourdelou, for example, Lawrence Stern, Reverend Stern. Not that he was into sectarian Christianity. He just found wisdom in the sermons, even if he didn't agree with everything he read in the sermons. And I read those sermons, by the way, when I wrote my book on his ethics, because I want, if he's recommending all this stuff, you need to read it to do good scholarship. All right, let's turn to education. We have some time left for that.
Okay, how much time do we have left?
I don't know.
Okay, more than 10 minutes because I don't have the 10-minute warning. Okay. Okay, so we'll move to education. On page 65, you state that ignorant democracy for Jefferson was an oxymoron. Can you tell us why education was so vital for Jefferson's scheme of republicanism?
Yes, he said in a republic with ignorance is impossible. It has never been, it never will be. So that was his justification for public education. Most states did not have public education. New England did because the Puritans wanted everyone to know how to read the Bible. But throughout the South, especially Virginia, you had to be a pretty wealthy gentry child to get a private tutor and be educated. So in a democracy, Jefferson thought you had to have public education, a whole tier of schools, the most basic being just teaching, reading, writing, arithmetic, and then like a middle school for those who did well in the lower school would be promoted all at public expense, even poor farmers, poor townspeople, to continue their education. And finally, the ones who did well in that at public expense would go on to the university. And the university is what we in Virginia call the university, or Mr. Jefferson's University, the University of Virginia that he founded in Charlottesville. And there you get the highest education, higher education, because the University of Virginia was really the first American university. All the other colleges are basically tied to a church or denomination or region, but Jefferson designed the University of Virginia to be a truly modern American university where you would learn all subjects, liberal arts, you would learn all perspectives on every subject, what we call academic freedom. You study all sides, all views, debate, questioning, what we knew in college in the 70s and 80s, and that we have lost in American higher education. Mostly by the political correctness in this century, the 21st century, and Title IX and censorship and offensive speech and all this stuff. And they got so tired of me quoting Jefferson on this. I quoted this 10,000 times. But I said, I was at a branch of the University of Virginia, and while they're busy censoring offensive speech and verbal harassment and all this stuff and not allowing certain subjects to be taught. And so I quoted Jefferson's eloquence in one sentence. They got so tired of hearing me. In one sentence, just like in the Declaration of Independence, he summarizes Locke's 300-page second treatise of government in one paragraph. He summarizes academic freedom in one sentence. He says of the University of Virginia, "Here, we are not afraid to follow the truth wherever it may lead, nor are we afraid to tolerate any error, so long as reason is left free to combat it." One sentence. He summarizes brilliantly The whole idea of the American university, the whole idea of debate and discussion and questioning, and not just to learn a number of subjects, but to learn how to think. That academic freedom, hearing all perspectives that I did in college and in graduate school, arguing, questioning, you could say anything. And he says, what do you do with bad ideas? Remember, he said, we will tolerate any bad idea. You don't ignore bad ideas because they're everywhere. You don't censor bad ideas. You refute bad ideas with good ideas. The truth will out.
Good
So
argument.
absolute.
There's a very Socratic sentiment.
Very Socratic. And
the essence of Socrates, Elenchus, his dialectic was just that.
Exactly. And that was what the university in America was to teach. And that would be for, the leaders, that natural aristocracy that would have to deal with, because when you learn to think and reason, you can deal with new problems. New problems are always coming up. If you've refined your mind through this dialectic, this Socratic dialectic, you will be able to deal with all the new problems that come up every day. That's why America has been a leader. It's not that we're better or smarter, it's that we've had this intellectual freedom, because that leads not only to intellectual progress, but every other kind of progress. Economic progress, technological progress, political progress, I would say ethical progress. And so...
Yeah, and that's essentially the gist of John Stuart Mill on Liberty, book 3.
Absolutely.
We argue that you have these various different opportunity scenarios, then you have free discussion, and what you do is you have progress. And Jefferson was wedded to progress.
As I show in that essay I sent you years ago, when I retired, I wrote my academic swan song, which was published and republished all over the world, the best by Brownstone Institute, entitled The Decline and Fall of the University. And I talked about this Jeffersonian ideal, and then how it's been corrupted and corroded. It's not enlightenment, it's indoctrination now. And then you lose social progress, economic progress, technological progress. You can't get people to put the lid back on the garbage can. You end up with a really dumb society. And so hopefully
that sounds like what's happening.
Yeah. So hopefully we will regain Mr. Jefferson's ideal. And there's a group at the University of Virginia called the Jefferson Council, which are basically conservative alumni who are wanting to get the University of Virginia back to that Jeffersonian ideal: academic freedom, freedom of speech, discussion, debate, and it's uncomfortable, but it builds a confidence. Notice he said, we are not afraid to follow the truth wherever it goes. We are not afraid to tolerate errors so long as reason's left. That censorship and political correctness and indoctrination really comes out of fear, as Hannah Arendt said in her book on totalitarianism. And so being able to play with those ideas, it's uncomfortable, but you learn to play with those ideas and ask every question and be challenged, makes you confident. And we need citizens in America who are self-confident. I'm not offended.
This again is the Lockean individualist element in Jefferson's thinking, being able to think for yourself, being able to use reason, not being afraid to, as Socrates once said, so what? If you prove me wrong, I can exchange error for truth. I gain by being proven wrong. And Jefferson's doing the same thing. It's really, it's a great benefit for me to be able to think for myself. Now we get back to Freud here. You talk about what's going on today in his group psychology analysis of the ego. Yeah, I'm aware of the time. We have, we're not going to worry about the rest of the questions, but there's a sense in which there's safety in numbers. That's what's going on today. We don't want to have to think, but we get into a mob group mentality where a lot of people think And Freud, not to be offensive here, but he uses the military and the church as two examples. And that happens in both cases a lot, but it happens in any mob-like group. I don't want to say the military, but you get a mob sort of group where the leader or some group of leaders thinks for the mob, and you're just part of it, and you feel American politics is a great example today. There's mobbyism.
Right. You feel righteous. You feel you belong. And again, my favorite 20th century political philosopher is Hannah Arendt, who was a German philosopher. She was Jewish. She fled Nazi Germany and came to this country, taught at the New School where I went, New School for Social Research in New York City. She taught at Princeton. And she wrote The Origins of Totalitarianism. And the main origin was that fear you mentioned and wanting to belong, like all those Nazis marching around and saluting. And so what we want is confidence, self-confidence in your knowledge, so much so, as I mentioned last week, when I was at Rutgers in graduate school, they actually encouraged criticism. And these are world scholars. I remember Benjamin Barber was the theorist of communitarian democracy. And he taught it in a course we had, a seminar on democratic theory. And he asked for challenges. And there was a philosophy professor or a graduate student who said, well, Professor Barber, I think you should change the title to from strong democracy to strong arm democracy. And Ben laughed and he said, that's good. I'll write that down. See, he wasn't offended. He wasn't prideful. He could laugh at himself. We can't laugh at ourselves these days.
Well, that's the very fact we don't laugh anymore to me is very sad. Now, I had a very similar education at University of Pittsburgh. I hope you're not laughing at University of Pittsburgh, but it's a very fine philosophy department. And the essence of good philosophy is just, philosophers always talk about conceptual space. You were expected as a student to work through philosophical problems, look at all the different perspectives that other philosophers have, and see if you can't find a different perspective, what was called conceptual space. Logically possible alternative to these other problems that maybe solves the philosophical problem or lends some clarity to it. Anyways, we're down to a minute.
Well, I'd like to suggest, because we still have 3 questions.
We're not going to get the questions. Can
we have a part 3? I know we didn't plan this, but this has been a great conversation. Can we turn these last questions into part 3?
Well, as I told Mark, I'm juggling about 5 projects right now, and my schedule's very up in the air, and I'm traveling and so on. I think I can do something next month on a Friday afternoon, but I'll have to let you know when.
Okay.
And by then we can talk about whether we want to finish this or discuss another topic. We can say.
I think, Garrett, you've covered a lot of the gist of what the other questions were asking in your ramblings. Just teasing you. No, in your thoughts on what's wrong with education today. And I couldn't be more in agreement. Donnie, you want to take us home on what's on for next week?